Game of Thrones didn't just end, it crashed and burned in the eyes of millions of fans worldwide. What was once television's crown jewel became a cautionary tale about how not to conclude an epic saga. But here's the thing, HBO isn't giving up on Westeros, and honestly, they shouldn't. Coming January 18th, 2026, we're getting A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, the adaptation of George R.R. Martin's beloved Dunk and Egg novellas, and I genuinely believe this series has the potential to restore faith in the Game of Thrones franchise. Not through spectacle or shock value, but through something the franchise desperately needs right now: heart. Today, we're diving deep into why this unassuming story about a lowborn hedge knight and his secret prince squire might be exactly what saves Game of Thrones' tarnished legacy. Before we talk about redemption, we need to understand the wound. Game of Thrones Season 8 wasn't just disappointing, it fundamentally damaged one of the most successful franchises in television history. The numbers tell a brutal story. The final season holds a deeply divisive reception among both critics and audiences, with common complaints ranging from rushed pacing to character assassination. We're talking about a show that went from cultural phenomenon to something many fans refuse to rewatch because they know how terribly it ends. The problems were systemic and well documented. The pacing collapsed under the weight of trying to conclude dozens of storylines in just 6 episodes. Daenerys Targaryen's descent into madness, which could have been a tragic masterpiece, felt abrupt and unearned because the show simply didn't give itself enough time to properly develop her transformation. The Night King, built up for 8 seasons as an existential threat to all of humanity, was defeated in a single episode with questionable battle tactics that fans still mock to this day. Jon Snow, the prophesied prince who was supposed to play a crucial role, was reduced to shouting at a dragon and then sent back to the Night's Watch for no logical reason. And then there's King Bran the Broken. The decision to put Bran Stark on the Iron Throne remains one of the most controversial choices in television history. Not because Bran couldn't be king, but because the show's reasoning that he had the best story rang hollow when so many other characters had been more actively engaged in the narrative. The whole conclusion felt rushed, unearned, and worst of all, emotionally unsatisfying. Perhaps most damaging was the revelation from House of the Dragon Season 2 about Aegon's dream and the prophecy of the prince that was promised. This retroactively made Bran's decision to still rule over 6 kingdoms seem even more nonsensical. If Bran as the three-eyed raven had access to Aegon the Conqueror's visions about why the kingdoms needed to be united against the White Walkers, why wouldn't he mention this crucial information? The franchise's expansion has only made Season 8's problems more glaring. Here's the harsh reality. Most franchises don't bounce back from endings this poorly received. Look at the cultural impact. Game of Thrones used to dominate water cooler conversations, Halloween costumes, and social media discourse. After Season 8, that conversation died almost overnight. People stopped naming their children Khaleesi and Arya. The countless think pieces and analysis videos dried up. The show that defined a decade of television became something people wanted to forget. HBO lost roughly half of its adult viewership after the finale, and even more telling, the rewatch value completely evaporated. Unlike other classic shows that gain new audiences through streaming, Game of Thrones has struggled because who wants to invest 70 plus hours into a story knowing the payoff is deeply unsatisfying? The promised Jon Snow sequel series remains in development limbo, suggesting even HBO knows the taste Season 8 left was bitter. The damage extended beyond just viewer disappointment. It affected how people view showrunners David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, whose subsequent projects have been scrutinized through the lens of their Game of Thrones failures. The fundamental problem was clear. Once the show outpaced George R.R. Martin's published books, the writers simply weren't equipped to carry his sprawling, intricate narrative to a satisfying conclusion. An outline isn't a story, and it showed. What makes this particularly tragic is that Game of Thrones Seasons 1 through 6 are genuinely brilliant television. The Red Wedding, The Battle of the Bastards, Hard Home, these are all-time great episodes that showcase everything television can achieve. But that brilliance makes the fall even harder to accept. The show proved it could be extraordinary, which makes its final stumbles feel like a betrayal rather than just mediocrity. This is where a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms enters the picture, and it's crucial to understand that this isn't just another Game of Thrones spin-off. The tales of Dunk and Egg represent something fundamentally different from both the main A Song of Ice and Fire novels and House of the Dragon. These are intimate character studies rather than sprawling political epics. They're complete stories rather than chapters in an unfinished saga. And most importantly, they're about honor, friendship, and heroism in a world that desperately needs those values. The source material consists of 3 published novellas: The Hedge Knight, The Sworn Sword, and The Mystery Knight, with George R.R. Martin planning anywhere from 6 to 12 total stories. Set approximately 90 years before the events of Game of Thrones, roughly 70 years after House of the Dragon, these tales follow Sir Duncan the Tall, a lowborn hedge knight from Flea Bottom, and his squire Egg, who's secretly Prince Aegon Targaryen, the future King Aegon Fey. What makes these stories special is their tone. Where A Song of Ice and Fire deconstructs traditional fantasy tropes and shows the ugly reality behind chivalric ideals, Dunk and Egg largely plays those values straight. These stories actually believe in knighthood, in honor, in doing the right thing even when it's difficult. Dunk isn't a brilliant strategist or a legendary warrior. He's a simple man trying to be good in a complicated world. His defining characteristic is his moral compass and his stubborn insistence on standing up for what's right. The novellas are also notably different in structure. They're linear, focused narratives centered on just 2 perspectives rather than the dizzying array of viewpoint characters that made the main series so complex. Each story is essentially complete in itself, following a clear beginning, middle, and end. The Hedge Knight revolves around a jousting tournament at Ashford where Dunk defends a peasant girl against a cruel prince and finds himself in a trial by 7. The Sworn Sword explores a water rights dispute between minor lords in the drought-stricken Reach. The Mystery Knight involves a conspiracy at a wedding tournament. These aren't battles for the Iron Throne, they're smaller, more personal conflicts. Now let's talk about why this particular story is positioned to rehabilitate the franchise. First, it completely sidesteps the issue that Doom Season 8, there's no need to rush toward an unknown ending because the source material is complete and finite. The first season adapts The Hedge Knight, and showrunner Ira Parker and George R.R. Martin know exactly where the story goes because it's already written. There's no guesswork, no scrambling to conclude plot threads without a roadmap. The 6-episode structure for season 1 is actually perfect for the material. Unlike House of the Dragon, which had to stretch relatively brief historical accounts into full seasons, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms has complete novellas to adapt. This means proper pacing, adequate character development, and time for the story to breathe without padding or rushing. HBO appears to have learned from past mistakes. They're matching the episode count to the material rather than trying to force stories into predetermined season lengths. Second, the show recenters the franchise on what made early Game of Thrones special: compelling characters making meaningful choices. Dunk and Egg's relationship is the heart of these stories. It's a genuine friendship between people from wildly different backgrounds, a lowborn knight who can barely read, and a Targaryen prince who's fourth in line for the throne. Their dynamic recalls the best buddy pairings from Game of Thrones, think Tyrion and Bronn, or Brienne and Pod, relationships that provided warmth and humor amid the darkness. The lower stakes actually work in the show's favor. Not every story needs to be about the fate of the entire kingdom. Sometimes a conflict over a damn stream or defending a puppeteer girl from an abusive prince can be just as emotionally engaging if the characters are well developed and their choices feel authentic. These stories prove you can tell meaningful tales in Westeros without dragons burning cities or ice zombies threatening extinction. Third, and this is crucial, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms offers heroism without naivety. One of Season 8's biggest failures was the lack of satisfying heroic moments. Jon Snow never got his confrontation with the Night King. Jaime's redemption arc was demolished. Characters who had shown courage suddenly acted out of cowardice. Dunk and Egg stories, in contrast, feature genuine acts of bravery and honor. Dunk stands trial by combat to defend someone he barely knows. He chooses principle over pragmatism time and again. But he's not stupid about it. He's painfully aware of his limitations and the dangers he faces. HBO has already shown it can successfully continue the franchise with House of the Dragon, which attracted massive viewership and largely positive reception despite the shadow of Season 8. The Dragon series succeeded by delivering what it promised: spectacular Targaryen drama with excellent production values and strong performances. It proved audiences will return to Westeros if the storytelling is solid. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms can build on that foundation while offering something different. Where House of the Dragon gives us high politics and dragon warfare, Dunk and Egg provides ground-level adventures and genuine warmth. This diversification is healthy for the franchise. Not every show needs to be the same type of story. The Westeros setting is rich enough to support different tones and genres. The casting appears promising. Peter Claffey as Sir Duncan the Tall brings physicality and earnestness to a character who needs to be simultaneously imposing and endearing. Dexter Saul Ansel as Egg will be crucial. The entire dynamic depends on the chemistry between these two leads, and HBO learned from The Last of Us that this kind of adult-child traveling companion story can work brilliantly in prestige television. The production team also inspires confidence. George R.R. Martin is directly involved as writer and executive producer, bringing his intimate knowledge of these characters he clearly loves. Directors Sarah Adina Smith and Owen Harris have strong track records with character-driven drama. The Belfast filming locations that serve Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon so well will provide visual continuity while the story itself offers tonal freshness. Here's something that often gets overlooked. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is actually the perfect entry point for new viewers. You don't need 73 hours of Game of Thrones or 16 plus hours of House of the Dragon to understand what's happening. The story is self-contained, the characters are introduced from scratch, and while book readers will catch references and Easter eggs, casual viewers can enjoy it purely on its own merits. This accessibility could bring in audiences who were intimidated by Game of Thrones' complexity or turned off by Season 8's reception. Parents who thought the main series was too dark might find Dunk and Egg more family appropriate. It still has violence and political intrigue, but with a lighter touch and clear moral center. The episodic nature of the source material means people could theoretically jump in at different seasons if the show continues beyond the Hedge Knight. The simplicity also works as a strength. After the convoluted plotting of late season Thrones and the dense historical tapestry of House of the Dragon, following two main characters on straightforward adventures feels refreshing. Modern audiences are sophisticated enough to appreciate well-executed simplicity. Not everything needs to be mystery boxes and shocking twists. For dedicated fans, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms offers delicious connections to the broader saga without being dependent on them. Egg grows up to become Aegon V, the unlikely, whose reforms and idealism would eventually lead to the tragedy at Summerhall. Dunk becomes Lord Commander of the Kingsguard and possibly the ancestor of Brienne of Tarth, one of the most beloved characters from the original series. The supporting characters include future key players in Westerosi history. Bloodraven, Egg's uncle, appears in the novellas and later becomes the three-eyed raven that trains Bran Stark. Egg's older brother is Maester Aemon, the wise old Maester of the Night's Watch who counseled Jon Snow. These connections reward longtime fans without being necessary to enjoy the immediate story. The show is also set during the aftermath of the Blackfyre Rebellions, conflicts that shaped Targaryen history and whose legacy echoes throughout the main series. Understanding this period helps illuminate references in Game of Thrones, while the Dunk and Egg stories make that history feel alive rather than just dry backstory. This balance between accessibility and depth is exactly what the franchise needs. Casual viewers get engaging adventures. Die-hard fans get rich lore expansion. Everyone wins. HBO is positioning A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms as a chance to prove that Game of Thrones' failure wasn't inevitable or inherent to the world itself, but rather a result of specific creative decisions and circumstances. The world of Westeros isn't broken, Season 8's execution was. These novellas demonstrate that you can tell satisfying, complete stories in this setting when you have proper source material and adequate time to adapt it. The January 2026 release date is strategic. It gives House of the Dragon Season 3 time to continue rebuilding goodwill while maintaining franchise presence. The confirmed second season renewal before the first even airs shows HBO's confidence in the material and their commitment to seeing it through properly this time. This is also about George R.R. Martin's legacy. The man has spent decades building this world, and seeing it remembered primarily for a botched ending must be painful. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms represents his most complete work in Westeros after the main novels, stories he finished and released rather than endlessly revising. Success here validates his broader vision and demonstrates that his writing, when fully realized, delivers what fans want. Let's be clear, nothing can erase Season 8. No amount of good spin-offs will make those final episodes better or restore the cultural dominance Game of Thrones once enjoyed. But that's not the goal. The goal is to prove that Westeros still has stories worth telling and that the franchise can deliver satisfying television. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms has everything it needs to succeed. Complete source material from the original creator. A manageable scope that allows proper pacing. Characters fans already love from the books. A tonal shift that feels fresh while remaining true to the world. Strong creative team. Reasonable episode count. These are the building blocks of great adaptation. The show also arrives at the right moment. Enough time has passed since Season 8 that rage has cooled into wary hope. House of the Dragon proved HBO could make good Thrones content again. Audiences are ready to give the franchise another chance if the show earns it. Most importantly, Dunk and Egg reminds us why we fell in love with this world in the first place. Not for shocking deaths or political machinations, though those have their place, but for characters we care about making difficult choices in a rich, detailed setting, for the possibility that honor and friendship matter even in a cynical world, for adventure and wonder and genuine emotion. Will a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms save Game of Thrones' reputation? That depends on your definition of salvation. It won't make everyone forget Season 8's failures or instantly restore the franchise to its former glory. But it can, and I believe it will, demonstrate that this fictional world still has magic left in it. That George R.R. Martin's Westeros can produce compelling television when adapted with care and respect for the source material. Sometimes, redemption isn't about erasing past mistakes, but proving you can do better going forward. That's exactly what HBO has the opportunity to do here. The Hedge Knight and his royal squire might just be the unlikely heroes who restore our faith in the Seven Kingdoms. I'll be watching on January 18th, 2026, and I genuinely hope this series proves worthy of the legacy it carries. What about you? Are you ready to give Game of Thrones another chance with Dunk and Egg? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.